If you're new to trials or just starting out, there's a great chance you've watched more than a few tutorials, but there's a lot of information that you're still looking for that you haven't found yet, and this video is meant to kind of fill that gap for you. All the advice and input I'm about to share with you ranges from the very tactical of how much PSI should I run in my back tire to the mindset of how should I think about riding, and then everything in between, the small techniques that wouldn't necessarily fit in a tutorial. There's a lot here, but I think all of this will be really useful for you. What kind of trials bike should I get if I'm just starting out or I'm really committing to being a trials rider? I would say that for most people, the street trials bike makes the most sense. It's kind of an all-rounder bike that you can roll on, you can practice techniques. Most people have like a BMX background and this bike feels the closest to it, whereas a specific trials bike like a mod bike or a competition bike, it's something that is a very specific skill. It's something that you can't just roll around on as easy, and it doesn't feel like anything else. It is easier to learn very specific trials moves, but it also depends on what you're going to use it for. If the area around you is loaded with big rocks and things like that, then maybe dive right into one of those competition bikes. If you live downtown where there's a lot of skate parks or street stuff, then you probably want to start on a street trials bike and then progress from there. You could start on a street trials bike and realize that you really love jumping from the back wheel, then you probably want to switch over eventually to a competition bike. But I would say start where it's the easiest and start where there's the most amount of applicable riding available. Do I need a trial specific bike to learn how to ride trials? I would say absolutely not. And in fact, I rode at the pro level on a cross-country Schwinn homegrown back in. So absolutely you don't need a specific trials bike. Will it make things easier? Absolutely. But you could get away with a bike that has wide handlebars and put a bash ring over your chainring to make sure you don't bend your chain rings or snap your chain, and you're good to go. My best advice for improving as fast as possible on the bike is to make use of every second of riding time you have. Now that seems like an obvious point, but what I mean is using every single thing that's in your way. So you get to a red light, you track stand. You find a crack on the ground, you bunny hop it. You're riding between spots, you ride the curbs and the gaps and all the little things in between. Even finding little ways to just make the most out of your entire ride. And on top of that, every time you're on a different kind of bike, so maybe you're on a mountain bike ride, maybe you're on your road bike or whatever, use your trial skills on those bikes as well. If you're on your road bike, practice your track stand. If you're on your mountain bike, work on your pivots and things like that. Use every second of riding time you can to improve as a rider. Use your body as suspension. And what I mean by that is bend your elbows and knees just a little bit and be independent of the bike. Your body is gonna move and the bike will follow you. It'll help you to get a little bit smoother. It'll help you to have more even pop over the bike. But most importantly, it will let you make movements instead of hanging onto the bike and going where the bike goes. It will help you kind of disconnect from that and move the bike where you want it to go. We talk a lot about the importance of brakes, but the most important part of that is using one finger to brake. Now, if you have one finger on your brake lever, it means that your hands are as wide as they possibly can be on the bar, which gives you a lot of balance. But even more importantly, it means you have the maximum amount of fingers on the bar, which helps you have the most control and the best grip on the bars. If you have two fingers on each one of your brake levers, you're losing a substantial amount of control over the bike and the handlebars, and all of the techniques will be a lot harder to learn. So try really hard to move your hands out as wide as you possibly can on the handlebars and just use one finger on those brake levers. One point that rarely gets covered in any tutorial is what you're doing with your actual grip on the bike. There's a lot of stuff talking about, when to pedal kick and when to lift up and all those different things. But your grip on the handlebars and when you rotate your wrists can make a big difference when it comes to specifically lifting your back wheel up off the ground. Think about rolling your wrist forward, and that'll make a big difference on what happens to the bike. If you don't believe me, stand next to your bike, grab the brake, and then rotate your wrist forward and see what happens to your back wheel. Check your bike every single time before you ride. Make sure all your bolts, your cranks, your pedals are super tight. The amount of hopping and movement that we make on these bikes is pretty substantial. And on top of that, if something is loose and you're going for a big move, A, you don't want it to fail, but the pressure that you're putting on the bike when you are doing those big moves could actually strip out one of those bolts or cranks or pedals, any of that kind of stuff. So before you ride, it's just kind of a good thing for your mental, but it's also a good thing just to make sure your bike is in good working order before you take it out. Trials can be really frustrating sometimes. There's a lot of repetition that goes into it to get that muscle memory locked in. So if you're having a hard time learning one move back to something that you can already do, or move on to something new to keep it fresh. Your body position on the bike makes it do so much more than you think. Your pedal movement is giving it the power to move in a direction, but your body movement is moving it either forwards or up or sideways. Think about the direction and what you're doing with your body. One of the main tips that I give through all my tutorial videos is to exaggerate your body movement, and this is exactly why. Another skill that doesn't get talked about a lot is creating momentum from a standstill. Practice slowing down to a stop and then creating a lot of movement at once. The 3-pedal technique is a great way to get this started. What kinds of off-the-bike things can you do to get better at trials? Specifically in the gym, focus on your core and do squats. Film your riding and watch it to see what you're doing. The way that something feels on the bike versus what it looks like can be vastly different sometimes. If you're watching a video of somebody ride, watch a video of yourself riding and see where the differences are. How much air do you put in your tires? If you're riding a street bike like this, I normally run a little bit higher PSI. I'll start around 40 and then add even more from that. You're not so worried about the tires compressing. You want to have a low rolling resistance so that you can carry speed through different things. So you put a little bit more air in there. Now, if you're a little bit bigger or whatever, you may want to adjust that specifically, but I would start at about 40 PSI. If you're riding a competition bike like a mod bike or something like that, I would run a lot lower. I'd be around 20 PSI on my mod bike, where I want the tires to compress a little bit more so I can use that rebound on big jumps, but also so that the tire flattens out a little bit to get the maximum amount of grip on the surface that I'm riding. On the mindset and progression side of things, remember what this is for. So as important as it is to isolate these different skills and learn each one of them and be able to hop this many times and do this many things, which is important for progression, also remember why you're doing this kind of stuff, why you're practicing it. So you don't need to get 180 degrees on a pivot exactly every single time. The idea is that you're turning around. You don't need to hop on your back wheel or your front wheel a bunch of times. The idea is so that you can get comfortable on the back wheel to do that next move. So really focus on what is this for as you're learning it and how it fits into your riding. Adding to that piece about the mindset of why you're doing what you're doing, try to link lines together when you ride. So instead of just doing one move at a time, try to do 3 or 4 different things back to back. Getting that flow is really going to help you out as you progress as a rider, and learning how to put different things together in a row is going to help you overall with your progression. It also keeps things fun. You're not just working on one technique at a time. Track your progression. Use different parts of your bike to remember how high or how far you're actually going when you ride every time. Remember, this whole thing is fun, and it gets really exciting when you go just a little bit higher or further every time you ride. What's the most important part of the trials bike? I think it's the bar and stem. A lot of people would say it's the brakes, but there are riders who can ride trials without brakes. The bar and stem gives you so much more leverage over the bike, and getting the right bar stem combo with the right rise and sweep makes all the difference in the world. There are a lot of ways to talk about managing risk as a trials rider, and wearing protective gear like helmets and gloves makes a lot of sense. You may have already learned this lesson, but you should wear shin guards when you ride, especially when you're starting out. The pedals can come back around and smack you in the shins. Sometimes it's a badge of honor for riders, but it's easily avoidable. You can even start off with like soccer shin guards. This is my most important and general trials advice. Start on a curb. Start small. Get your confidence up. Get your timing, your technique dialed on something small, and then find the next taller curb and the next taller feature and grow from there. But get everything done on that curb first. I could still ride a curb for at least an hour and do all kinds of different things and progress and practice and really utilize that sized feature to grow and then take it from there. But start small on a curb and then move on. Think about that idea of calculated risk. Knowing that I can jump this high, I can jump this far, I've done this already, or I've done something really close to it, that helps you progress as a rider. That confidence comes with managing risk the right way. Where can I find more trials content on the internet? First of all, thank you very much for starting with my channel to start learning how to ride trials, but there are plenty of other places where you can get information and see videos and all kinds of other stuff. I'm gonna link to all this stuff below, but definitely check out the Shindig podcast, check out Allie Clarkson, check out the Useless Trials, go look up Jack Carthy, Charlie Rolls, Flip with 2 Ps, the Brakeless Trials rider, and come and check us out on Twitch. On Twitch, we do a live stream where I ride and we answer questions, and you can get even more information like the stuff we've been talking about today. My final piece of advice is to learn trials techniques in order. A big mission of my channel is to order everything so that you can build your skills one on top of the other. It will make everything a lot easier as you progress. So what I want you to do is start with this tutorial playlist here and then eventually move on to this one. That'll get you through the basics of your beginner and intermediate level trials skill.